Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, this is Justin Brown. I'm the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. And today I have Yaag on the show. Yaag is a B2B marketer that has spent all of his professional life with martech. He's written 7 books and spoken in 15 different countries. Yaag runs the ABM Conversations podcast, where he interviews the best and brightest in B2B marketing. And in today's episode, we're going to discuss the power of a niche podcast, the research he does in advance, and what it takes to get your show noticed. I wanted to bring Yaag on because he decided to go niche with a podcast before people even started talking about saturation. It's not just a marketing podcast. It's not just a B2B podcast. It's a B2B podcast with a focus on ABM. I hope you enjoy the show. So in your first episode of the ABM Conversations, the one after the pivot from Coffee Conversations to ABM Conversations, so I guess it was actually episode 2 is technically like your first episode way back in 2019. You tackle marketing for B2B marketers in that episode, and content marketing specifically. And it's interesting to me because you started small and niche with focused conversations. That episode, I believe, is just between the hosts, and you've now been able to grow into a point where you can be more broad, bringing in conversations with CEOs. We talked about you bringing on Guy Kawasaki. I mean, that kind of stuff's amazing that you were able to grow the show from niche to more broad. So to start off, I'm curious why you decided in 2019 that a focused podcast was a good move.
Right. So, as you rightly said, we pivoted from Coffee Conversations, and it was a point where Manish and I thought that, Coffee Conversations got a little boring, and we quit it for some time, and we got a lot of requests from different people, and we got DMs on LinkedIn where people said, hey, what happened to Coffee Conversations? Why did you stop that? And then we decided, okay, since people were looking forward to content and they really cared about it, we wanted to deep dive and make it a much more detailed and focused conversation. And that was the birth of the ABM Conversations podcast. We wanted to do all things B2B marketing. But to start with, we did not want to sound broad. We thought we'll start with talking around ABM topics. But then as such, the world of ABM is itself in such a way that it is B2B marketing done right, if you look at it in the most simplistic manner. So we thought we'll broaden it and we'll also include the sales folks. And that's how it expanded. And until about 13 episodes, we never even had a guest. And then there were a few inbound requests that came in. And then right now, we have some of the biggest folks from the marketing world across, right? People like, say, Scott Brinker, Rand Fishkin, Sangram Vajre, Chris Walker. And next week we are going to have a shoot with Guy Kawasaki, David Cancel, and all the likes.
That's amazing. And we experienced that as a business. We were always afraid that if we niche down and said, here's who we serve, that we'll miss out on things. And what you find out is that when you niche down, what happens is you end up speaking to a specific audience, but it doesn't mean that other people don't want to listen as well. And then you can kind of broaden your message from there. Motion, my business, talks to B2B tech marketers, but I have clients in all sorts of different fields, from nonprofits to others. So it is interesting. I think niching allows you to focus your audience. And that's something I'm curious about. Were you ever worried that not enough people would care about your podcast because it was a specific niche? I mean, you already had a little bit of a following from Coffee Conversations, so I imagine that helped. And I know now you've branched out, but tell me about how you gained a following in the beginning.
Right. So what happened was, we launched our podcast, I think, around the 10th of December 2019, if my memory is right. But just about a couple of weeks before that, Manish and I posted out content on LinkedIn asking people that, hey, we think of starting a podcast, and what do you think about it? And do you think it makes sense? And what are the topics that we should speak about. And then we got about, I think, roughly 100 different responses. And there was a common pattern. Like everybody said, like, you guys should deep dive on ABM because that's one area you guys are well known for and you can dive deeper. And then when I looked at the ABM arena within the podcast community, there were only a couple of them that were doing well. One was Flip My Funnel by Sangram, and I think there was a couple of others. That's all. And so we thought let's start there, in the sense like Sangram was doing a daily podcast. I knew that I couldn't do that much. But then, he had grown in a big way, and I think he's supported by Sweetfish Media. So we thought let's take a shot and see how it goes. And now looking back, as you said, there were topics. I mean, there are topics that we have touched. We did not even think that it was in the realm of ABM Conversations. For example, we've had somebody like Christy Movila, who is the growth leader at VTEX. The latest episode was with him, and VTEX is comparable to Shopify and the likes in Europe. Similarly, I mean, I couldn't imagine bringing somebody from the e-commerce world because I absolutely have no idea about it. And the best part about this podcast is it let me deep dive into certain topics, and it has kind of become our university for both me and Manish. It has become a university where for every episode, we go back and do so much amount of research and work and get to know that specific domain so that we can ask the right questions. And right now, the very goal of our podcast is not to, say make money out of it or probably be aligned to a brand or anything. The idea is to probably make it the best repository of B2B marketing content out there. So that has been the journey. And even though, Manish is not going to be with the podcast anymore, I mean, he's a great friend and he's going to continue to support me from the outside. And we'll continue the journey, and the vision is still going to be there.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I actually was having this conversation with Nick Bennett the other day. He does the Rep Your Brand podcast where he's talking about personal branding. And I said one of the most fun parts about a podcast is that you get to learn all of these techniques and tactics as these experts are talking to you. It's one of the things that I'm most excited about relaunching our podcast as recorded content is I'm going to be bringing on all of these either professional podcast practitioners or tech, tech visionaries to come on the show, and I'm going to get to sit here and learn from them. And I think that is, an underrated feature of being a podcast host.
Absolutely. And, for all Manish and I did not even know what was the right platform for us to distribute, like what kind of mics to use. I didn't know that there was something called a condenser mic and a dynamic mic, like all those sorts of things, how to distribute, and then using Zencaster for our recording, like all those kind of things we figured out on the way. In the sense, when we recorded our first podcast, it was just, we had about 4 topics that we wanted to record, and we went to a nearby studio. And we just recorded it because we did not have any equipment, and we said, let's do this. And once this was done, then I came back home. I researched what are the platforms that are available, then zeroed in on Simplecast, then zeroed in on the name ABM Conversations, and then did all the designing on Canva, and then told Manish that, hey, here it is, like, what do you think? And once we both agreed onto it, the podcast was out in the next couple of days. So yeah, we literally had no idea. I mean, starting from learning how podcasting works to the different topics that we learn from our guests. I keep saying that it has become our university because, there's so much. Even if, I had got nothing out of it, I would say the amount of knowledge and experience that I've received from it is immense. And I'm very thankful for all the guests that have been on the show till
And let's talk about that evolution of guests. So you start out, it's just you and Manish chatting, and then the show evolves over time. And that's something that I talk about to my clients, to just people who ask me questions about podcasting all the time, is that your show will evolve, and where it is in episode 1 and where it will be in episode 50 are going to be very different places. So you started out, you said the first 13 episodes were just you and Manish, and then you started to get guests. Tell me a little bit about how that evolution of the show happened and how that all transpired.
Right. So the first time we put out a message asking what are the different topics, right from that moment, we were actually, there were people, because they knew us from Coffee Conversations days, there were people who DM'd us and said that, hey, the day you start, we would love to be on your podcast. But then we wanted to, first make sure that we have gotten our paths right, and we do this for at least, 13, 14 episodes until we get to know how podcasting works, because we did not want to embarrass ourselves and the guest when they come in. So that was about that. And our very first guest was somebody called James Purvey, who is a big time VC, sits in Singapore, but he has experience across the world. And he's been he's been someone who has had 40 to 50 years of experience. And such a kind of a personality coming out and says that, I'll be your lab rat, was something really fantastic, and we are very thankful for. And from there on, the way it evolved was, majority of our podcasts, it's purely grown because of relationships, and because either they've known me or they've known Manish, and then the conversation start. Either we reach out, but 90% of our guests have been mostly inbound, unless there are. And the other way around, way it worked was that there are certain times we go and look at what are the topics that we want to discuss, and then we decide if this is the topic, then who's the right person to talk about this. Like, say, the moment we thought of field marketing, Nick Bennett was our obvious choice. And similarly, when we were thinking about martech, Scott Brinker was our obvious choice. So sometimes those kind of outbound reach also happen. But it goes both ways.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's something we hear a lot, which is, will I be able to get guests? And I think that if you put together a show that has a good central focus, with a certain profile that consumes your show, and you're putting out material that looks good, sounds good, it won't be an issue. People will be excited to come on your podcast. And in talking about guests, I want to pivot the conversation just a little bit. Personally, I think a big issue with B2B podcasts is the amount of research and homework that's done before an episode. If you listen to podcasts that are for entertainment purposes, where you're interviewing someone who's famous, there's all this background, whether it's a sports podcast or an entertainment podcast, that is public domain type background. So the interviewer sounds very smart and gets to ask good questions. And in B2B, you see it a lot that and your show is ABM Conversations, so it's kind of ironic that you do as much homework as you do. But I think there's a common misconception that it is a conversation and not as much like a traditional interview. And I think that there's a balance there, of course. But, and I tried to impress you a little bit today by going back, listening to your first episode, things like that. And I think you do a really good job of that. So I'd be interested to hear what goes into your preparation and research for a guest, and how you balance a conversation, two people, you and I hanging out, having a good time, versus it being an interview, trying to get to substance, no fluff, like you mentioned. Talk to me a little bit about your process there, preparing for a show.
Right. So one of the very first things that Manish and I spoke about while we started the podcast was we had a list of podcasts, and we also had a list of things that we didn't like about certain podcasts. And one of those things was the kind of chit chat that people have, which is not very contextual to a lot of people. Like, say, for example, if somebody is from a very specific region, like, say, if I'm from the Valley, and there is something that happens within the Valley, and there's a joke within that, you have an inside joke. Not everybody listening to it is going to get. So those kind of things. And then, what really matters is, at the end of the day, anybody listening to a proper B2B marketing podcast is coming there to get something out of it. That's really important. And if I'm going to speak for 45 minutes or 1 hour, and at the end of the day, people are going to get just about 5 minutes of substance, then it's not worth it. That's something that was always in the back of our mind. And even when you look at the way we write our content between me and Manish, that's something that has also carried into the way we do our podcast is we don't spend a lot of time building up the topic. We actually get into certain specifics and then ask the deeper questions. For example, yesterday we had a guest. He was a VC. He's a VC from a company in Canada, and so some of the questions that a typical VC never gets asked is, people ask them generally topics about, topics like, what do you look for in a company when you invest in them, or what is attraction A, B, and C? But nobody really goes and asks them things like, hey, what if a company fails to keep up with the accountability that they promised? Like what happens after that? So those are some unanswered questions. Typically, when you look at any topic, the nitty-gritties of how really things work never get answered. So those are the kind of things that we wanted to really go in and tackle. If we are talking about content, we want to talk about what works, what doesn't. We're not going to go around and say that, hey, look at top funnel, mid funnel, bottom funnel, because we know those things don't work anymore. We really have to be going with what's working today and be as actionable as possible. So when we go back and do our homework, we look at what are the questions that we can ask this person, because what is that we want to get out of this episode. In a sense, like how to go about A, B, and C is going to be the holistic topic, and then we break it down into what are the things that we really want to get to know, and then we look at the case studies or set of things that these people have already done, or we look at even before reaching out to these guests, we are quite sure that these are the things that we are going to get out of them, and then we do an exploratory call with them. Once we do the exploratory conversation for say about 15-20 minutes, we get to know their personality, and we get to know what works, what doesn't work, and then we also give them an insight into how our audience is, like who are these people, and then try to identify the right topic that works for both of us. And then it further helps us in our research. Then between me and Manish, we had this process that one of us would take up the job of coming up with the outline for that particular episode, and we would exchange notes with each other, and then we would finalize that, okay, this is what is going to work. And not every guest prefers questions to be sent in advance. Certain people like to have it on the fly. So there are also people who like to have questions in advance. So we like to send them about 5 or 6 questions. And then the rapid fire section is something that's unique to us. We don't send those questions in advance. We tell them that we are going to put you on the spot. That's the whole game. And yeah, that's how we go about it.
And about the preparation that you do, it takes time. And so
it takes a lot of time.
And so how do you justify, and you did a lot of this just now, but in 15 seconds, how do you justify why it's so important to do research on a show? Because, and real quick before you answer, I think that, it's like cost benefit, right? It's like, well, I can go on and just have an episode and it'll be fine and we'll have a conversation. Or I can spend 2-3 hours, maybe more, doing my research. Are people going to care that much? Why is it worth it?
Right. So again, it goes back to our audience. Like as I say on my website, our podcast is not about getting 1 million downloads. We like to build one-on-one relationships with our listeners, and we've had this good fortune of our listeners coming back and telling us what they want. And when the first 13-14 episodes aired, we had a lot of people come out and say that Yaag, these are the things that you're doing well. These are the things that you need to improve, and those are the kind of things that really helped us. And when people listen and come back and say that these are the things that they took out, like say for example, I would like to give a big shout out to one of our listeners by name Scott Marker, who every now and then goes on to make a big post out of what he got out of a particular episode. And then when I look at those posts on LinkedIn, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Somebody has taken out the time to list what he has gotten out of it, and it is like almost equal to me writing a blog, but it's a pricey format of that. So yeah, the takeaway for us is primarily, it's also a little bit of a selfish reason, in sense like we want to learn those things from the guests. That's also there. So we want to ask the best questions. It's not like, we just ask them things like, hey, where did you go to college? Like what kind of coffee do you like to have? That doesn't add value to anyone. So we want to ask the right kind of questions, so that, like say for example, if I'm getting somebody like Guy Kawasaki for 1 hour to converse with, I'm not going to get that any other way. He's there because this is a podcast and he's given me the time. And if I don't ask the right questions and if I don't get the best value out of that 1 hour, I'm not doing justice for myself. I'm not doing justice for the audience, and I'm not doing justice for the guest as well. So I think that's very, very important there. And it's a mark of showing respect to somebody who's on the show.
And do you think that's what's led to your show gaining popularity? I mean, the fact that you can name your listeners, the first show I ever did was in college. I worked for the college radio station, and we joked that the only 3 people that listened were the 3 people doing the show. And, when someone would ever come up to me and say that they listened to an episode, probably a friend, it meant a lot to me. So you start out very granular with, these specific guests. And then I think over time it starts to have this snowball effect where more people start to feel drawn to the show, so and feel special that they're getting attention from you. You feel special that you're getting attention from them. You hear in anything, I love my fans, whether it's musicians or athletes or anything. What do you think has helped grow the show so much from going from this, coffee conversations to where you are now?
Right. So I think purely it's about the kind of content that we put out. And it's again, we always say that it's continuous work in progress. We don't think that we are there with the best content yet. But the aspiration is 5 years down the line, we want this to be the biggest repository of the best B2B marketing content out there. We want people to, think like, all right, I have this question. Where do I go? Maybe let me go out and check if this topic is being discussed on the ABM Conversations podcast. So that's the vision that we have in mind. We don't think about, if we bring this guest, how many views will we get? Like if we tackle this topic, how many views will we get? We are not playing that game. And one of my favorite thought process is adapted from one of my favorite people, Naval Ravikant, who is the CEO of AngelList. He says that always play long-term games with long-term people. So that's something that I've stuck with me, and I'm just going with that. I'm here for the fun of it. I'm not here to mint money, or I'm not here to make it transactional. So the whole idea is to enjoy the process, and I've been continuously doing that, and that's what has worked for me. It's more like play rather than work. So I look forward to recording a podcast every week with somebody, and that 1 hour of conversation and the initial, say, 15-20 minutes of warm-up talk that we do, it feels so personal. And the amount of relationships that I've developed, again, that's one thing that I've always believed. There's been a lot of relationships that I've developed over the last 1 year, and I'm very, very thankful to put the podcast.
Yeah, and it's something that I say, I don't even have to say it to my clients. They say it to me, which is that the podcast is the most fun part of their job. These are people who work on projects and analyze data and have to write ebooks or publish and promote them, and then they get to have a show, which is something that in the most simplistic of kind of analogies, we've been watching shows since we were kids, and then you get to have your own and you get to watch it, you get to play with it the way that you want to, and it just is a piece of marketing and a piece of content that's just a lot of fun for people.
Yeah, it's decentralized media right in your hands. It's how you make use of it. And we talk about how companies have changed over the years, where every single person is a potential media, and what you consume is also purely dependent on how you look at things. So there are always two parts to any content, right? So the kind of content you consume is going to contribute to the way you think or perceive things. So it depends. It depends how selective you are. And you start by consuming any piece of content, but over a period of time, you develop a taste. Similarly, you start talking about certain things, and then you refine over a period of time, and the refinement keeps going. So that's the fun part about it. And I think now that we have this media in our control, it's extremely important for us to be responsible about it as well.
And as we come up on time here, we probably have a few more minutes. I do want to talk a little bit about distribution. I think you do a really good job. There's kind of this balance that you have to do is, do you come up with your own podcast page on LinkedIn and that versus cross promotion from your personal. Can you just talk to me a little bit about your approach for distribution of episodes?
Right. So first up, our podcast is there pretty much on all the podcasting apps that are available. So I use Simplecast for distribution. So that's one piece of it. And then there have been occasions where some of our podcast episodes have been republished on other platforms. For example, Sangram was kind enough to publish 4 of our episodes as part of the Takeover series in Flip My Funnel. So that was one good way where we got a lot of traction. And the third piece is also about repurposing our podcast into different formats. So one is we do small snippets of certain things that are interesting and post those videos on LinkedIn and on Instagram and places like that. And apart from that, I also write a blog. And one of the key pieces that I would like to communicate through this podcast is that don't just use the transcripts as is, because that's not going to really help. It's going to look like you've done a lot of lazy work and you've just republished it. So we spent good amount of time in rewriting it and making sure that it's very topical and it's very meaty. It's a good 1,500 to 2,000 word blog. When you read something, you get something out of it. And then we look at it like, different people like to consume in different formats. Somebody likes to read in about 5-10 minutes, then this is useful. And if they like it and they want to listen to the full version of the podcast, then we have the embedded part as well. So that's how it works. And holistically speaking, distribution is something that we have discovered on the go. We did not start there, but then we realized very soon that you have to start with distribution in mind so that you tackle the right topics and distribute in the right areas.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's something that we always try to say, which is that people consume content in different ways. I mean, a very simple example of reading versus listening. If I'm, sitting on the couch watching something with my fiance, maybe I'm paying half attention to what's on TV versus what I have on my phone. I may be interested in the guest that you had, Yaag, but I'm not going to put headphones, we're spending time together. I'm not going to put headphones in and go into my own world and listen to the episode. But I may also still want to consume that content. And if I have it written, I can just, kind of flip up my phone and still get some of that information and then queue the episode up for later if I want to go listen to it in full. The same thing with video content. You can put that up on social and someone can consume a bite-sized piece, whether that's an audiogram or some of the similar things that we're going to do with this episode, cutting out chunks of the video itself. So we try to say written, audio, and video are the different ways you can slice up a podcast episode.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. And, we have had lots of our growth. I would directly attribute it to that. And the funny part, talking of attribution, since I brought it up, I think with podcasting, people also have to be cognizant of the fact that the attribution is going to be intuitive. It's not going to be directly attributable immediately. Sometimes it might happen that people come back to you and say that, hey, you know what, Justin, I heard that particular episode with Yaag and you discussed about podcasting. And that's how I got to you. And today we are discussing and today I'm your client. So that you can look back and connect the dots. But, if you're starting with attribution in mind on day one, then you're going to get frustrated and you'll probably quit podcasting within a month or two.
I won't even tackle that because if you want to hear someone talk about that, just go listen to pretty much anything from Chris Walker and he'll make sure to let you know. You just feel it sometimes. I mean, the podcast community is doing a good job. Wistia is coming out with tools. I know Casted has things that they're trying to track. It's difficult from an attribution standpoint right now. I don't know how much of the data I actually trust sometimes, like on how long somebody listened. I mean, these are episodes that are getting downloaded locally. I don't know how you're tracking how long somebody listened to an episode. Sometimes it's streaming, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's from the web, sometimes it's not. But at the same time, what I can tell you for me personally is I knew the podcast was working when I knew that I all of a sudden had a voice in my community, whether that was B2B marketing or now even more focused in B2B podcasting. Those are things that you just can't replicate, being able to have your own voice. I've never written a book, Yaag, or I've spoken on a few stages, but the podcast is kind of a low barrier to entry to getting that ability to have your voice
Absolutely.
be heard in your space.
Totally with you on that. And I learned it by experience. And in 1 year, I can definitely tell you whatever you said is so true. And the best part is just, people need to go out and express themselves and have fun and not take them too seriously. But eventually when you get absorbed into the process, then you will feel that you're having fun and you'll start putting in more into it and you'll start working. When I started, I literally did not have a process. I'm not a process guy, as I told you before. And thanks to Manish for bringing in and instilling that whole process and rigor into me. And whatever you see today is, a big part I owe it to him.
All right. Well, we're coming up on our time here. So I got three questions for you to finish. The first is, now that ABM Conversations is kind of moving into a new era, of course, hats off to all of the work that you and Manish have done, but how do you see the show evolving moving forward?
Right. So I think the work is still going to remain the same. The only change is going to be that it's going to be one voice instead of two, which was originally our USPM. And a lot of our people who listen to us said that it's one of those rare podcasts where two hosts are interviewing a guest, and that's being done seamlessly. I'll miss that part, but I'll make sure that the content quality is still up. And of course, Manish is still going to be that final arbiter of content quality. I'm going to reach out to him because he will give me a knock on my head if the quality goes
Nice,
down.
a little bit of accountability. That's great. Yeah, Tristan and I started our show. We were two hosts with a guest, and we had to parse ourselves out. We did a good job. We just personally felt that, and we have this in our course actually, that there are multiple options. You can have one host, two guests. You can have two hosts, two guests, two hosts, one guest, whatever. It's whatever works for you. So we tried it with two, and then we found that we liked it better actually for us to be able to have these more conversational interview type episodes. So it's really whatever works. And I think that's great. And then second to last question here, 3 tech tools or pieces of equipment that you can't live without for your podcast.
One is Canva, obviously, and second is Zencaster, which I use for my recording purposes, and third is Simplecast, which I use for distribution. So 3 straight. I'll also add the fourth one, which is my blog.
All right, nice. There you go. And the last one on the note of the blog, where can people go to find you and to learn more about ABM Conversations?
Right. So the easiest to find me is LinkedIn. Just type YAAG. My name is unique, so I'm hard to miss. And do the same thing on Google. You might find my website, pretty much everything around that. And ABM Conversations podcast is available on all podcasting apps. And whatever is your favorite one, just go and listen to that, and come back and give me a feedback, and we'll continuously try to improve from wherever we are.
Well, Yaag, I hope I did all right. Dusted off some rust today. It was really great spending some time with you. Thanks for joining me on
This was
recorded
fun.
content.
Thank you so much, Justin. This was real fun, and I really appreciate that you chose to have me on your show.
Take care.